Day one of Denver Broncos training camp is in the books, and tight end Greg Dulcich, he was one of the key players that shined in the first acclimation practice of training camp. We'll break down what we saw from him in the quarterback competition here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger. We cover the Broncos every single day here on the podcast for everybody in Broncos Country. I'm a reporter from Mile High Sports. I go to the practices. Sayre, he's a site expert over there, predominantly orange.com. He has you covered there, as well as we bring you deeper inside Broncos training camp here today for all you everydayers out there. And I just want to say thanks for making us your first listen every single day, wherever you get your podcasts or available on YouTube. And look, Broncos Country, here's what you can expect on today's episode of the show as we dive deep into a day one of Broncos camp recap. We'll dive deep into Javonte Williams back at practice, looking slim and dropping weight according to Sean Payton, and the return of Greg Dulcich as we all anticipated, and he stood out in a big way. We'll dive deep into all that here on today's episode of the show. So, Sayre, really, the storyline, I think, coming into Wednesday's practice in Dove Valley, day one, acclimation, right? You're going to have Wednesday and Thursday of acclimation, light-based practices, not to the extent of what we expect to see on Friday when fans are able to attend. But in the early action that we did see, got to see Greg Dulcich back in action, team stretch. The locks were flowing. And then when the helmet came on, we saw the old Greg Dulcich, which was a nice sight to see in 7-on-7 and in team.
Yeah, it sounds like Greg was out there moving really well, looking explosive. I saw some videos pop up from training camp practice, including some of your stuff, Cody, over there at Mile High Sports. So great work on that. And I think really when you see Dulcich moving around like you do in these videos that are popping up, you see the size, you see the acceleration, you see the burst, and you see just what kind of a difference maker he's capable of being. I know it's practice. I know these guys are wearing shorts, but hey, Greg Dulcich is a game-changing playmaker at the tight end position. There's no question about it. We saw it at UCLA. We talked about it in the lead up and after that draft class, where a lot of analysts are saying this is the best tight end in this class. I know it wasn't a great year in 2022 for the tight end position, but like Daniel Jeremiah, I believe, had him as the number one tight end in the class. And so I think that there's lofty expectations even for a third-round pick. But for Dulcich, you're out there, you're also wearing the number 80. That carries a lot of historical significance in Denver. And you're playing the tight end position, which feels like the Broncos have been trying to find guys out there. They can't stay healthy, right? You go back to Julius Thomas, Jeff Hireman, Jake Butt. I know Noah Fant stayed healthy, but Albert Okwuegbunam tore his ACL early on. Like, the Broncos seem to be on a very unlucky streak right now at the tight end position. But if Dulcich can stay healthy, we caught a glimpse at this, lead up practice or this ramp up practice of exactly what he's capable of bringing to the table.
Well, and I'll dive a little bit deeper because the stuff that wasn't filmed in terms of clips of Dulcich is like the team's 7-on-7 period and the team's team period in terms of what we were able to see. So what is it that Greg Dulcich did exactly? Well, let's start off here in 7-on-7. Greg got his first reps when the second team unit came in. The quarterback order, which we'll dive a little bit deeper into here on today's show, was Jarrett, Stidham, Bo Nix, Zach Wilson in terms of reps, in terms of 7-on-7 and also team. But what we saw was Dulcich stepped on the field during 7-on-7 with Bo Nix, and Nix threw a beautiful corner route to him. And look, Greg ran a great route to the point there was not a DB anywhere near him. He was wide open, caught it with both hands, toe tapped at about maybe 16 to 18 yards downfield. And it was like, all right, hey, there you go. There's like, okay, if this is Greg Dulcich's first catch of the offseason, first time catching a pass since coming back from an injury, can this be what he needs to say, hey, I still got this. I can still do this. You talk about those little confidence boosters. That's big. Then he got some reps in the first team period that the Broncos had. Obviously, it was scripted in a sense where four plays, just like OTAs, 4 plays per quarterback. Jarrett Stidham found Greg Dulcich coming underneath on a nice play, caught him. Greg, with his yard after the catch ability, his size, speed, and athleticism, was able to get yards after the catch. Probably, if we were talking about a real game simulation, You had a defender trailing underneath because there was some traffic there in the middle of the field there. When he caught the pass and got upfield, there wasn't anybody near him for maybe about 5 or 6 yards. So, and then he ended up scalloping for a little bit more, like 15 to 17 yards at that point. So you love to see that. Those are what we consider chain movers. And that was the only action in terms of which we saw Greg Dulcich outside of his positional work inside individual drills. But nice little confidence boosters. And hey, like, you have demonstration right now on the practice tape that Greg did this well. His speed looks good. His athleticism is still intact. And he can run a pretty good route. That, I think, was a promising sign to see. He made it through day one. Everybody in Broncos country now is saying, okay, hey, is he going to make it to day 2? I think that's what we're waiting to see. Like, no flare-ups, hopefully, knock on wood. But it was a good start for Dulcich coming back after all the narratives and all the stuff surrounding him.
You and I talked about stacking days being so important for Greg, and I think that is still the case. Obviously, this is day 1, and everybody in Broncos country appears to be taking the positive reports with a grain of salt. But at the same time, it's tough to contain your excitement, because this is a guy that we saw, Cody. I pulled up some of his game logs from back in 2022. I mean, he was lighting it up against some pretty good defenses. The New York Jets, the Baltimore Ravens, the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, he had really good games against some good teams back in 2022. And I know the Broncos weren't overly successful as a team back in that season, but you could tell the difference that Dulcich did make when he was out there. And he obviously played a pretty big role in the win in London against Jacksonville. I know Jacksonville was on the cusp of kind of turning things around that season as well, and their defense was a big reason why. So he had a big game against them too. But he's one of those guys that I know we don't want to put the cart before the horse. I'm trying to limit the hot takes, because I get as excited as anybody else when I hear reports like this. But Dulcich, to me, is one of those Jersey guys. He could be a Jersey guy. Like, right now, how many Jersey guys do the Broncos have? I've got Pat Surtain, and you get excited about a quarterback like Bo Nix coming in, but how many guys do the Broncos have on their team right now that fans are going to go buy their jerseys at the team store, right? And Dulcich could be one of those guys, and he's certainly somebody that could end up being a fan favorite rather quickly if he can stay on the field. So it is about stacking days, but I don't think we can overstate the potential. I know that's the P word, the dreaded P word in football, the potential and what you could do or what could be, the hypothetical. Dulcich is one of those guys that you believe in the hypothetical until it's way beyond, too late to believe in it, because he's so talented and he brings such a dynamic to the offense. I think can't help but get excited right now.
And rightfully so. You want to have that excitement build up through training camp. You want it to extend to the preseason, into the regular season. That's what I think, for like fans listening to the show, that's what being a fan is. Like, if you're not getting excited every year, even if like the last year didn't end the best, like, what are you even cheering for? That's what sports fandom is. You like the dilemma, or like the duality of like, I know this could potentially hurt me, but I love this team. Like, that's what being a fan is about. And look, there are some exciting things and obviously some exciting players. Good step in the right direction here for Greg Dulcich as we take you deeper inside Broncos training camp here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Another player who had some questions this offseason surrounding him, and him being 2 years removed from a major injury. Javonte Williams had also a really good day during the first day of Broncos practice, and a new development surrounding him this offseason. He dropped some weight and is back to the same playing weight he was at North Carolina when he was a two-headed monster alongside Michael Carter at UNC. So there's a lot of excitement around Javonte. He looked good. He looked sharp. We'll tell you what we saw from him and maybe where Sean Payton's expectations are for the running back room. And you'll get all that and much more here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at the GameTime app. And look, GameTime is the best app to be able to use if you want to go see your favorite sporting events, a concert that's going on in your area, or other events in your area. GameTime has you covered with everything. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime, they take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and tickets to other things that are going on in your area that you want to attend. Not only that, they're an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and it makes it easier to get tickets, and you get them faster because tickets also go down and the prices of them go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. So make sure you check out the GameTime app here today for all of that. Plus, they have flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event that you want to attend to. Plus, the seat views where you get a panoramic view of the action from the vantage point of your seat inside the app. You get to know exactly what you're going to be getting into when you go to your event through the GameTime app. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
A slimmer Javonte Williams was looking sharp, according to Broncos head coach Sean Payton, at the team's first ramp-up practice to training camp here. And we're going to discuss Javonte Williams, maybe the reports of his demise being a bit premature, if they should have ever been discussed in the first place. We're going to talk about that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, and want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day. And if you haven't already, Cody and I greatly appreciate every single one of you that decides to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or if you jump over to YouTube as well and do that. Shout out to all of you that make us part of your day, however you choose to do so. Let's talk about Javonte Williams, because you know what? Javonte's in I think the definition of a make or break year. He's in a contract year in 2024 and is coming off of, quite frankly, a pretty terrible season. I'm sure that there were aspects of it that were really positive in terms of just the fact that he was out there after the knee injury, Cody, right? I mean, we talked about that on the show a year ago at this time, that him being at training camp was nothing short of miraculous based on the injury that he suffered in 2022. So there's a lot riding on this season for Javonte Williams. And I think it was no coincidence that Sean Payton made it a point to shout him out when he was given the opportunity to say, hey, who stood out to you today? I know you're not wearing pads out there and everything. I think it was significant that he brought up Javonte Williams' name on the first day.
Yeah, no, 100%. And look, going back to last year, and obviously when 2022 happened, Javonte had the ACL. Like, when you normally suffer a major knee injury like that, it's normal to put on some weight, right? Because maybe it's like, all right, maybe if I put on some more weight, I might be better protected, but you don't want to lose your explosiveness. Like, it's tough. Like, we talk so much about MMA fighters trying to stay in terms of like the right weight class and cutting down to be where they need to be. It's like, to be able to be athletic. Like, Sean Payton made a great point about that, I think, at practice as well. One thing he talked about was sometimes you see guys at the college level, even mentioning receivers, they're at a certain weight. And, as they get in the weight room, they maybe get bigger, but from a muscle standpoint, and that can actually impact their game sometimes in a negative way, even though you want to be muscular and fit and things like that. It's just about figuring out what the right thing is for your body type. And for Javonte, he definitely looked quicker, a little bit more explosive. I know I put together a video report every day after I attend practice. I got some footage in there of Javonte catching a little bit of a pass and then running. Like, Javonte, he looks good. He looks comfortable in comparison to where he was at in OTAs. Like, even just watching him in OTAs, I started thinking, I was like, all right, he's still trying to find that level of comfort. He looks comfortable now, and I think he took this time off to really continue to elevate in his training. Obviously, nutrition's been a big thing for him. I'm excited for him, but we did see that speculation come up a little bit this past week, right? About how Javonte, really the last roster spots between him and Samaje Perine. I kind of scoff at that, because in my head, knowing what I know and knowing how much Sean values a guy like Javonte, there's no way Javante's not going to make this roster this year. There's no way Javante's not going to be the Broncos starter. Like, they are going to figure out how to be unique with how they divvy out reps at the running back position this upcoming season. But for Javonte to be like, all right, Javante's on the roster cutting block, I scoffed at that. I never believed that one moment in terms of where he's at, because the Broncos have so much faith internally invested in him. And I know Sean does as well. So when I saw that, I was like, when you connect the financials to Samaje Perine's contract, you look at obviously Jalil's, his rise last year, you draft Audric, Estimé, like, I just don't see it being a sign that, hey, Javante's going to be out the door. Sean Payton clearly doesn't think that as well.
Well, something that I found that was very interesting to me, and maybe only me, is the fact that Javonte just turned 24 years old in April. I had no idea. I felt like maybe he's at least 25, 20. Yeah, he's a young guy. I mean, he's younger than some rookies that just came into the NFL. It's kind of crazy to think about. So to me, you've got a guy that just turned 24. Remember when Javonte came out of North Carolina, he was only a couple years removed from changing positions from linebacker to running back. So I know that a lot of people harp on him for vision and things like that at the running back position. I mean, quite frankly, the guy was still learning the position when he left North Carolina. So I think there's an aspect of it to that that's like the timing for him may be just right for the breakout. And it's easy to be frustrated and say, well, what we saw last year from Javonte is kind of what he is. He's pretty well cooked at this point. But man, the guy's 24 years old. And I can't help but just look at that number and say, okay, I think that kind of resets my own personal expectations to say he's not 26. He's not going on to, he's not going to be going into the age 27 or 28 season on his second contract like some of these other backs that hit free agency last year. There's a huge aspect of the youth element to this. The fact that he hasn't always been a running back, that very much plays into Javonte's favor. Now, contact is contact, but he hasn't been racking up 300 touches for the last 8 years of playing football in his life. He's been playing linebacker a little bit. So I feel like Javonte, Cody, has a chance this year. Remember the gauntlet that Sean Payton threw down to Cortland Sutton last year and was pulling up his Pro Bowl tape and saying, hey, like, this is the guy that basically you need to get back to being this guy. Well, that reminds me of what you just said. He talked about to Javonte and showing him the UNC tape and saying, this is the back that I want. It's very much a vote of confidence from Sean Payton to say, I see what you look like at your very best. This is what we expect from you going forward.
Yeah, no, and I would say this too, Broncos country, do not write off Javonte Williams. Don't start writing your obituaries for his roster status. I guarantee you, I'll put it on it here today, Javonte's roster spot is not in danger. He'll be the starting back come opening day against the Seattle Seahawks. And looking forward to seeing him continue to rise and grow in that comfort level. I think that's why Sean brought up like the 2-year comment about after like a 2-year removal from an ACL, because Sean knows the timeline, and Sean also has more information into like how Javonte's feeling, what he's seeing, things like that. And I think that's important for us to continue to monitor here. In terms of also the running back position, we'll stay the course here. Audric Estimé was ready by day one, as Sean Payton had outlined to us during OTAs and during the team period. He had a great run inside the tackle off the left side where he got upfield, got skinny, and nobody touched him. It would have been a 15-yard run for him in a game. So a little bit of that, not like, coming into it, we said, okay, hey, like he's not going to be like a guy that's going to run a 4.40, but he's got the ability to be explosive in moments, and he's able to have burst. We saw that from him. A great sign, especially coming off of a knee scope procedure during OTAs. It was good to see him back in the mix as well at the running back position.
I love the potential of Audric Estimé in this offense as a rookie. I just feel like he's going to be a weapon that the Broncos use, whether we're talking goal line situations, whether you need a drive starter, whether you need a drive finisher, whether you need somebody to come in and just be fresh legs. Let's say you're up by 10 points late in a game and you want to throw some fresh legs out there. I think Estimé is going to drive defenses absolutely crazy with how hard he runs the ball, and how much contact he's able to not just absorb, but how many guys he can carry with him. I mean, over 900 yards after contact last year at Notre Dame. And to your point about the burst and explosiveness, Cody, he touched 21 miles per hour on the in-game GPS in a game last year against Louisville. So we know that the wheels are there when they need to be. Not that he's going to be burning people like Chris Johnson of old, but certainly got those wheels when he needs them. And when you combine that burst and explosiveness with his size, just looking at him, Cody, I mean, he's paying homage to the barrel man out there. He is an absolute barrel when it comes to his body type. And I love what we see from Estimé already. I feel like he's going to be a stud for the Broncos this year.
Yeah, if you're a corner or a DB, you don't want to see him one-on-one in the open field because he's either going to, run over you. And that's the thing is like when you go against bigger guys who aren't afraid to use their bodies to hurt you in a game, like that's going to be a dynamic that I think between Javonte, between Audric, and with Jalil's speed. Like that's my projection for the 3 backs I think are going to make the roster. That's a combination that can just smash you and then also dash you when you least expect it. Like death by 1,000 paper cuts, I think is going to be how Sean Payton in the run game plan to attack defenses this upcoming season. Obviously, day one of training camp, everyone's the healthiest they'll be for the rest of the season beginning today. That could change, obviously, as camp goes down. We hope everyone makes it to the regular season in one piece. But what were some of the other storylines at Broncos camp, including an update as to who's really competing for that inside linebacker job next to Alex Singleton. The competition is heating up there. Plus, we'll dive a little bit deeper into what the quarterbacks look like on an early and light day of practice on day one of Broncos training camp here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive every single day. eBay Motors, they have everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into power, speed, or style, eBay Motors, they've got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Once again, that's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. As we take you deeper into inside Broncos training camp in Dove Valley here on the Locked On Broncos podcast, I want to say thank you once again to all the everydayers out there. Thanks for making us your first listen, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube. We appreciate you so much to everyone out there in Broncos country. Everyday season is here. If you haven't been an everyday listener this offseason, you need to make that change right now because the Broncos have nothing but practices and games from this point all the way to February. This is the place to be when you want objective, up-to-date coverage of all things orange and blue, what's actually going on the practice field, the things that we see, and all the storylines that you can get involved with here. Locked On Broncos. Sayre, really kind of diving into a recap here, day one. Let's kick things off by talking a little bit about the quarterback competition, maybe updating that first. We talked about the order a little bit earlier where it was Jarrett, Stidham, it was Bo Nix, Zach Wilson in that order, quarterback 1, 2, and 3. In terms of rep usage, there was 1 7-on-7 period. There was 1 team period. Each quarterback got 4 reps in each of those periods. So a total of 8 reps for all the QBs on day one of Broncos camp and a light acclimation practice as we anticipate. Probably going to be the same for day 2 for the Broncos, and we'll see if the order switches up here as well on Thursday. But overall, I mean, we talked about 7-on-7. I felt like when you look at Jarrett Stidham, we'll start off with him. Stidham, he connected on his first 2 passes. I think one was a dump off to Samaje Perine. The other one was a quick little pass, a short pass to Adam Troutman. And then, from that point forward, he had a couple of different pass plays there. And I think Jarrett got the ball out of his hands quickly. Bo completed 2 passes out, 2 out of 4. There was 1 pass he had to Troutman up the seam, defender, I think it was Cody Barton, did a great job getting inside the pocket of Troutman and knocking the ball away. And then there was a pass to Marvin Mims that was just, high into the outside. You want to throw that type of football in the NFL, in my opinion, especially when you have a DB that was playing press coverage on Marvin Mims. But then he made that pass to Greg Dulcich, the corner route for about 16 to 18 yards. Beautiful play there. And then he found Nate Adkins for the final completion of the 7-on-7 period for him. So not really looking too much into how the quarterbacks performed. Zach Wilson in 7-on-7 probably looked the best out of anybody on the day if we had to keep like a measuring stick here. He had a pass to David Sills on a post pattern. Great route, great throw by him. He had a comeback throw a little bit to Devon Vele. Like Vele did a great job working with his speed vertically, throttled down. Like he's going to be a player to watch in the preseason, I think, for Broncos country. Then he had another pass downfield to David Sills, but Sills got away with a push off. It would have been offensive pass interference, so we're not counting that as a completion. But team was drastically different. You saw, I think, for Zach Wilson, first play of his series, really the final series of day one of training camp, he got sacked by Darrell Chami off the edge in terms of that. Like he was in the backfield really quickly. And then he was sacked by Andre Smith, the linebacker, and Elijah Garcia on the very last play. It would have been a sack in a real game situation. Obviously, you can't touch the quarterbacks in practice, but nothing really for Zach Wilson to work with when he got to the team period with the third team offense. And so we'll see when the pads come on. We anticipate Saturday. That'll change a little bit, but really the Broncos quarterback competition, nothing really to read into here on day one.
Which I think is pretty standard procedure, right? Of course, these guys are getting evaluated on their practice tape by the coaching staff. And you and I talked about it. I mean, to have a real three-way competition, you're going to need to see Zach out there with the top offense. You need to see Bo out there with the top offense. It can't just be these guys are splitting reps evenly, right? We've talked about, you want to see them just like any other position. Can they work with the starting unit? And whether it's offensively, defensively, you want to see them out there with the rest of the starters to be able to get a clear evaluation. And so we'll kind of be monitoring that as time goes along. I think maybe is the same thing true for off-ball linebacker. You mentioned Cody Barton breaking up a Bo Nix pass there. What's the competition looking like between he and probably Jonas Griffith, it sounds like, for the linebacker spot next to Alex Singleton? I don't know that it's necessarily just a two-man race, but that was kind of the vibe that I got based on what people were saying about camp. What was your read on that whole situation at off-ball linebacker?
Yeah, primarily, I think it's going to be between those two guys for the starting job. And I think, maybe as training camp goes on, like, here's the thing, like with these acclimation practices, they only had one team period, 1 7-on-7 period. Usually, like in OTAs, they at least had 3 team period sessions. I imagine it'll be 3 team period sessions, but they'll be extended, right? Like we talked about them having 4 plays each in terms of the QBs. I think you'll see that bump up to 7 and 7, and then maybe that'll start to dwindle down as the competition maybe plays out organically. But I think you're going to see the same thing in terms of maybe one day you're going to see Jonas working with Alex Singleton. The next day it's going to be Cody Barton. And then I think you're going to really kind of try to figure out, okay, hey, who's our second team guys, where I think that's where Lavelle Bailey, Justin Sternad really come into the mix as the second team guys. And obviously whoever doesn't win the starting job will more than likely be that other guy on the second team defense next to Justin Sternad. And then you'll have a guy like Lavelle Bailey who will likely be a practice squad player for the team, unless there's something that just drastically changes in training camp and the preseason. But overall, I think that competition there is working itself out. Really hard to gauge how the defensive back one's going. Damari Mathis got a big portion of the reps on the outside, and the team period for the Broncos here today. We'll see if Riley Moss gets those reps, obviously in Thursday's acclimation practice. But maybe even something else I want to touch on here too about what we've seen so far on day one, kind of like the overall vibe. You just seems like there's a different mentality from the defensive line. And it's allowing, I think, the linebackers, it's allowing the corners and the safeties to have fun, to play free. And you're going to see, I think, when the pads come on, I think you're going to see some chippiness, which, it's good at times. You want to be able to harness it in the right way. But I think it's going to pay off for the Broncos. I think it's going to make the offensive line better. But I also think the Broncos defensive line is going to get significantly better as well in that same regard, with the addition of John Franklin Myers and just the guys that they have rotating in. Zach Allen had a good day. Like, in terms of if we're talking about players that stood out, Zach Allen was another guy who stood out defensively for the Broncos.
It's an area of this roster that if it can get better, the team is going to get substantially better. You and I discussed that. Beyond quarterback, defensive line was really the number one area that this team needed to upgrade. Last year, according to ESPN, 30th in the league in pass rush win rate, 28th in the league in run stop win rate. So I mean, the proof is in the pudding. We saw it all unfold. Those numbers kind of just support what we saw on the field, that the Broncos couldn't get after the quarterback. They couldn't stop the run. And that happened all too often last season. And it was something that really sunk this team's chances late down the stretch as well. I mean, early on in the year, yeah, you got yourself into a pretty bad hole, which also contributed heavily. But at the same time, it was over the course of the season, even in some of your big wins, like against Buffalo, if not for James Cook and Josh Allen giving the ball away, 600, 700, 800 times. I can't remember how many it was at this point. That would have been the reason they lost that game, because they couldn't stop the run. So that is something that you want to get more physical, obviously, in the defensive trenches. And I love what Alex Singleton said after practice. Those defensive linemen, they're going up against a really expensive offensive line every day at practice. So puts a little chip on their shoulder, I think, as well.
And look, Broncos country, this whole entire saga of Broncos camp will play out. I'll be at every single Broncos training camp practice. Sayre and I will break down every single practice after the fact with all the information, the updates on position battles. That's what if you become an everyday listener of the show, if you're not one already, that's what you can expect here on the podcast. So with that said, Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show, recapping and bringing you inside Broncos training camp day one here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. For your second listen of the day, make sure you go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, as you get an inside glimpse inside training camp from various teams. We had a lot of local experts who are also boots on the ground covering their teams respectively for the start of training camp. Check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube or 24/7 on the Amazon Fire TV apps. We'll be back tomorrow for a brand new episode show recapping day 2 of Broncos Camp, the second and final acclimation practice before fans are able to attend and things get even more real for Broncos Country. We appreciate you so much. We'll see you then.